welcome everybody who's Hi everybody, welcome to this webinar this morning. We're just going to wait a minute before we formally kick off just to let all of you come in. I hope that you're hydrated and that you're sat in a great place, comfortable for a really great discussion this morning with an amazing panel of speakers. I am Swati Deepak. I have the pleasure of moderating the session this morning. And we're going to be discussing new avenues in philanthropy. And this is part of a webinar and an event series that's co-hosted between two organizations that's very close to my heart. The London School of Economics Marshall Institute, of which I'm a proud visiting fellow, and also Empower, the Emerging Markets Foundation, which I'm very happy to be the UK co-chair of. So today we're going to do a spotlight on Asian philanthropy, and what better than this incredible group of speakers that you see on your screen this morning. They are representing philanthropy across the region. And really, the point of all of these webinars between Empower and the London School of Economics Marshall Institute is really to explore all of the new kind of styles and avenues of giving around the world. And I think many of the people on the call are some of my inspirations for the ways that philanthropy is evolving, changing, or even holding on to and evolving from deep and rooted histories in their parts of the world. So I'm really excited to jump into that today. We have an incredible set of panelists. You'll probably have seen their names. So I'm just going to give you a very quick overview because I think if I was to say their incredible bios, the whole of the session would be taken up by the incredible achievements of everyone on the call. So we do have Radhika Bharatram. She's the founder of Karm for Young Indian Women. She's also the vice chairperson of the Sri Ram Schools, and she's an Empower India board member. We also have Cheryl Fofaria. She's the head of social impact and philanthropy for Southeast Asia for UBS Bank. We then have Alam Jivraj. He's the chief operating officer for global markets at Nomura, and he's an Empower Hong Kong board co-chair. We have Natasha Joshi. She's the chief strategy officer for Rohini Nilankani Philanthropies. We also have Nagma Mullah. She's the CEO of Edelgive Foundation. And then finally, we have Brian Sun, who's the co-secretary general for the Institute of Philanthropy. So an incredible, incredible panel. So philanthropy in Asia is not just evolving, but it leans on a very rich history of its giving. And we know today that it's charting its own path. And this panel really brings together voices from across that region that are redefining what giving means in their context. And together, we're really going to explore how Asian philanthropy really stands apart, shaped by cultural nuances, collective values, and a deep-rooted sense of community responsibility. We know that in our region, when we look at the CAF annual giving survey, the most generous nation in the world is Indonesia, which is in Asia. We have really rich histories and we have our own languages and words for historical ways of giving, whether that be zakat, zadaqah, fitrana, or bayan nihan, from many different parts of the region. I was also looking at some of the stats. The start of 2025 has really reshaped the space for philanthropy globally. And at the moment, the estimations are that because of the rollbacks in a lot of the overseas development assistance and ODAs that have traditionally emanated out of North America and European nations, because those commitments have gone down, especially since the start of this year in 2024, almost 6 countries reduced their ODAs. And since the beginning of this year, a number of others have also joined that. So, to achieve the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, emerging market and development economies face an investment gap of almost 3 to 3.5 trillion a year by 2030. Of that, the estimations are that 2 trillion must come from domestic finance, a trillion from external, and then almost 500 billion a year from private sources. So there's going to be a real sense of what does philanthropy outside of the traditional sort of European and North American ODA countries really do to step up to the world that we're in at the moment and the challenges that we face. And we're going to go through three kind of parts of this discussion, and then we'll have time for some Q&A with all of you. Also, just to say, for those of you that are just joining or have joined us, the session will be recorded. Please, if you want to share this with other people afterwards, you can do, or come back to it. You can also put any of your questions into the Q&A function. And at the end of the panel discussion, we will come to some of your Q&As and hope to be able to answer some of them. So I'm going to take us through an arc of all of these panelists, past, present, and their futures, and the ways that they see Asian philanthropy evolving. So first of all, Radhika, I'm going to come to you. Radhika, you're a thought leader and an inspiration to many women who are embracing philanthropy for the first time. From your perspective, what are the opportunities for women-led philanthropy, especially in Asia?
Thank you, Swati, and thank you for inviting me here today. Just sort of put some context in India. Giving and philanthropy comes from a deep sense of seva, which means a sense of building communities and taking people along. And that has been the foundation of how we have looked at philanthropy in our family for almost 100 years, building institutions that stand for change. I think as women gain economic empowerment in Asia, you will see a huge shift in giving. The three top things that I would say, which are opportunities for young women philanthropists, is actually to look at long-term deep impact. I think women understand how long it takes to change norms and bring about systemic changes. And I think their involvement will really help in moving the needle. And that has been our endeavor with Karm. The second would be to really sort of listen deeply, listen deeply to the people that you're hoping to support. I think many solutions come when you are involved in listening to the people that you're wanting to support. And I think that has really helped us in building Karm. We are constantly listening to our girls and evolving the way we are building our programs. And the third one would be to be bold and to do things differently. You have to take risk. You have to look at possibilities and not the proven paths, because if you want to move fast, you need to do things differently. Invest in institutions or programs that have been overlooked and underserved. Gender being one of the ones that I focus on. 1% of CSR and philanthropic funds in India goes to gender equity, and that's so shocking. And for me, this is like a very personal and a very deep commitment to really move the needle, and to build Karm as an institution that stands for gender parity. And another one would be, it's such a great opportunity, at least I'm seeing in India, where there are a lot of conversations that are happening between the organizations. And so there is this movement to collaborate, to co-create. And I think that will give an amazing push, and a push that would be coming from grassroots and moving upwards. So that would be my three top sort of advices or learnings. And the last would be actually to bring your heart when you give. I think we don't talk enough about it. We don't talk about bringing the person in. Do it from your heart. Bring in the compassion, bring in the love. This is not um, a production house, right? You're not manufacturing anything. These are human beings. And it is so critical to bring in the human touch, to listen deeply, and to walk along the people that you're working for. So that would be uh, my three or four top
What
points.
a succinct and really powerful way to start the discussion. Thank you so much, Radhika. I love the points that you mentioned, and it made me really think that women really, when I think about the women in my family, I don't think any of them have not been philanthropic with their resources. They've always supported people in their communities, in their families, their neighbors. And I think, what you're talking to really builds upon that journey of community led, deep rooted, grassroots, bold, and heart giving investment. So thank you. Brian, I'm going to come to you. Brian, the Institute of Philanthropy plays a really pivotal role in building philanthropic ecosystem across Asia. How do you balance addressing immediate community needs with investing in long-term systemic change through philanthropic initiatives?
Fantastic. Thank you, Swati. And definitely thank you to the Marshall Institute and to Empower for bringing us all together here today. Before I start, just for those of you who might be newer to the Institute of Philanthropy, we were established about a year and a half ago by the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which is one of Asia's largest philanthropic funders in terms of annual giving. And so for us at IOP, balancing the short term and long term, always tricky. And I would say, especially so in Asia. Swati, as you mentioned, so diverse. And on one hand, it's where a lot of the global growth and wealth is coming from and where so much potential is. But on the other hand, really faces tremendous and increasingly complex social needs. And so, thinking about the short and long term, I sort of look at it in three ways. First, in the immediate and in the short term, and that is directly addressing urgent community needs, whether that's in health, climate, poverty, disaster relief, and more. These must be supported. And as Radhika mentioned, I completely agree. The key to this is listening deeply, and working together in partnership with the communities. Then there's what we see as a long-term change in each issue area. So how do we solve the root causes of issues and work at a systems level? What preventive systems can we put in place against, in the next disaster? And this, I would say, is a bigger area where we ourselves at IOP focus our funding and our co-funding. So we have partnerships in pandemic preparedness, talent development for health professionals, or supporting innovation challenges for new ideas. And then on the third level is what I call the infrastructure long term in a way, which is how do we build the philanthropic sector infrastructure within Asia that makes all of this possible at scale and in an enduring way. And we recognize that Asian philanthropy is diverse. It has a centuries old tradition, but in many ways it's quite nascent in sort of how it thinks about itself and its level of professionalization and institutionalization. And so how do we help Asian philanthropy as a whole professionalize further, build strong institutions, adopt good practices, and amplify actually much farther beyond what a single funder can do? And that, I would say, is the core of why the IOP was created, to work with others to build the data, talent, infrastructure, knowledge, and practices for Asian philanthropy in Asia and for Asia. And what I really hope is that when that happens, we will have many, many more excellent funders who can address the short-term and long-term issues and across the many issue areas that we all face. And I would say, honestly, are becoming larger and more complex by the day.
Thank you so much for that, Brian. I love it's like all of you must have conspired before to get your like top 3 points because I'm loving all of the bullet points that I'm able to take with it. But I loved the thinking about how we can't ignore some of those immediate needs. We have to also build for the long term, and we need to build the kind of infrastructure and the guardrails around there. And it's incredible to see the work that the IOP is doing across Asia in order to help catalyze, build on that momentum, and really help like professionalize that sector in the face of so much need. Thank you, Brian. Natasha, I'm going to come to you. So, Natasha, Rohini Nilangani Philanthropies has catalyzed the ecosystem, and it's really inspired other philanthropists on their journey. I think Rohini Nilangani is the most generous woman in India, according to one of the surveys that came out last year. Can you share a bit about your journey in building the ecosystem around you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Swati. So, in terms of how we operate and what we look at as the ecosystem, we do have like areas of work that we focus on. But I think over and above that, what we realize is that every area is tied to every other area, and all of our work is also connected with everybody else's. So we've done like I don't have bullet points, but what I can say is that I can break it down to probably three approaches that we use horizontally for ecosystem building, if that's the way we want to call it. So one is, of course, we actually do spend a lot of time in building language and typologies for the areas of work that we support, because I think there are one is that we do a lot of horizon scanning and we do a lot of frontier work. So not just what's urgent today, but what's coming up and what may become urgent, even 10 or 20 years down the line. But because it's in the future, it's hard to sort of situate that with language and typology today. So we fund a lot of research, especially qualitative and novel pieces of research that allow us to get to that understanding. And this helps to sort of socialize this vocabulary with others. And then they are able to find their own voice in this work, which is typically what happens. The other thing, of course, we do is we do a lot of co-funding, and we also do we fund pilots within sort of organizations that have their own areas of work. But if they're interested in building adjacencies, so for instance, whether it is with mental health, you may be doing any piece of work which is existing, but because we have an understanding of mental health, is there an integration of a mental health lens in your work? Is there an integration of, for instance, on gender, we work with masculinities, but what is the adjacency with the work that you're doing already? So I think for us, it's really important that all of the work that everyone else is doing, can we have an additionality on that rather than sort of just, do something outside? And the last, of course, is we take convening quite seriously. So we convene our portfolios, we convene philanthropists, we convene, philanthropy staff, sometimes formally, sometimes informally. And I think we take that process of meeting and engaging in person very seriously. And that is something that we have spent time and energy on. And from all these three sort of horizontals, we do a lot of writing, because I think what we have discovered is that everybody does so much incredible work, but you have to really take time out and allocate that time to share it out with everyone else. So that's one thing we've done intentionally over the last 3 years. And I feel like it's really helped us learn, because people have responded, people have fed back into what we have put out, and we have found very unlikely allies and so on and so forth. So I think this is the way that we've operated.
I love that. I love and for someone who didn't plan their 3 bullet points beforehand, you did an amazing job of doing that on the spot, Natasha. But I loved your point around the importance of community building in the way that you address and work with your portfolio through your convenings, through the integrations, through the co-funding as well. Because I do think, it speaks to some of the points that Radhika brought up earlier around that community-led approach, and something that really harks back to the histories of our communities and where we're working. And I also love this point around writing, because I do think that, I can't remember exactly what the phrase is, but there's something around, if we don't write our own histories, they're written for us. So I think I love that sort of thing around how we charting, and to Brian's point as well. Like Asia has a really long history of this, but what are we doing to like solidify it and make it really our own, and document and preserve that for the future as well? So we're not just leaning on European or North American forms of the work that we're doing. Thank you, Natasha. Nagma, I'm going to come to you next. So, Nagman, let's begin with a deeper dive into corporate giving. Give was one of the first Indian organizations to flip the script on gender, on flexible giving, and so much more. Can you share more about how you grew Give to be at the forefront of philanthropic giving in India today?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be sharing space with such wonderful people who are kind as well as extremely smart in the way they think about giving. I think the quick answer to your question is it has taken me 10 years to be able to tell you that we have only just begun. That it's okay to say that. The fact is that we it's my 13th year in the space. Edelgave is barely it's turned 18 this year. So we are a very young foundation. And because we are a young foundation and we happened to walk into this space before CSR happened in 2013, we also had some time to learn how grassroots operate. What do human tragedies actually look like? What is the expectation of from capital that these organizations have on the field? And also we were able to see some of the patterns of giving of those who gave simply out of the desire to share and desire to do charity. And then CSR Act happened, which has done a lot of good, and also some questionable moves have happened because of it. Because if you look at CSR as a mandate, then we don't have to work so hard and talk so much about impact. I mean, it's fairly easy to move money. We've learned as a race, we have as a human race, we've learned how to move money very efficiently, very quickly, and very economically. But the fact is, our mandate is how to bridge the gap of resource between for-profit and non-profit. And when we started looking at it from a CSR lens in 2013, what we understood is that these two worlds are not simply separated by resource, but also a common point of context. The fact is, most of the people of wealth in not just India, but in Asia are people who have earned wealth very recently. When we compare the Western philanthropy with the South Asian philanthropy, they have a huge journey ahead of us because they come from wealth that has a couple of centuries behind it. And then there is transference. Also, philanthropy is thereby there is a comfort with wealth and money. The South Asian fraternity, freshly independent, freshly entrepreneurial, has also earned its stripes the hard way, and it is just about getting comfortable with wealth. So philanthropy has been very core to our values that come from our religion and our region, but it's not structured the way the Western philanthropy looks at it in forms of structure. So that's something that we have to understand. Now we talk about the corporate and the development sector integration. The two worlds are extremely different, and the way they view depravity is very different. And there's very few points of context. Edelgave, way back in 2013, decided that it will be the point of context. It will be the place where that exchange can happen, where the misery that most of India faces in different kinds will be articulated for those with resources to understand, and also those with resources will get some kind of support to be able to identify right causes instead of simply signing checks off to the most proximate causes or the causes that come with referrals. That was really the mandate. Basis that, we focus first on getting our backend in order, shared our backend with any foundation who would like to join us in the journey of exploring. Because if we have to have these two worlds meet, we have to ensure that there is good compliance, there is good regulation, there are good systems, but not at the cost of what the grassroots really needs to do. That's where there is a slippery slope, and we find ourselves there. And for the last decade, really, we've been doing that. And that's, if we've moved any kind of needle, it has really come from there. And I should say, out of folks like on this panel, Rohini Nilekani, what you rightly said, is the most generous woman. There are similar other people. They have joined hands with us. We were able to mobilize things because we are not alone. So yeah, the only thing that I've learned really is, if you plan anything alone, we are not going to move beyond the starting point.
Thank you so much for that, Nagma. Really authentic and honest journey about the evolution, and that, we don't have to be perfect, and we don't also have to match what the rest of the global philanthropy is looking like. There's the time and the space to really be able to carve out our own unique paths within Asia that are authentic and are durable also for our futures that we see ahead. Thank you. Cheryl, I'm going to come to you next. UBS is a mainstay and a market leader in the philanthropic landscape globally. What does your work look like in Asia? What is the same and what is different from working in other spaces?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the privilege of being part of this group. I really appreciate it, and I'm learning so much already. I suppose just by way of a little bit of context, but the Optimus Foundation, the UBS Optimus Foundation, is really the firm's kind of philanthropic platform that was created about 25 years ago in an effort to just support our clients in executing and implementing their kind of ambitions in philanthropy and impact. So now, sort of fast forward 25 years, and it has become quite a scaled operation, sort of with about 120 of us running around the world, kind of chasing impact, and approximately 300 million or so kind of committed in funding last year alone, but just to over 370 programs around the world in more than 80 countries. And about of that sort of, number of 370 programs, probably about a third or so is scattered around Asia, and that's rapidly growing. And the firm has also prioritized Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa as real areas of need for funding. The bit, I suppose, whilst we do a lot very broadly, but the bit I'm sort of particularly passionate about, where I think actually Asia has really kind of stepped up, philanthropists that we work with have really kind of leaned in, is the sort of pioneering work that we've been doing in social finance. And that's, really sort of out of a realization that philanthropy alone probably isn't going to be able to solve the issues that the world faces. So we have kind of created quite a few first of its kind social finance structures, including actually a number of which have come out of Asia and really been backed by Asia disproportionately, I would say. So the world's first development impact bond in 2015, about 10 years ago, we structured in India to educate girls in Rajasthan. More recently, we just closed one of our biggest kind of equity investments from the impact investment portfolio into SwipeRx in Indonesia, which is really trying to transform healthcare outcomes via using a kind of network of pharmacists in Indonesia. So really, I suppose the point here is just that I do think that philanthropy and the dynamic around how to achieve impact is really changing in Asia, and partly it's because there is this very entrepreneurial culture that Nagma was talking about, this, kind of drive to be okay and great with innovation and happy to support it. And also a very natural ability to kind of collaborate, because really it's been part of all of our histories and all of our kind of, the cultural root, the heritage of how, things, the businesses and the family businesses who've created most of this wealth in Asia have developed is through trust, relationships, collaborations, not just with one another as, say, I don't know, other families and businesses, but also with governments and with civil society. So it's really kind of baked into the natural heritage. And we've seen the same actually transform our work in collective giving. So, sort of when we think about our climate collective, for example, bringing together philanthropists from around the world to focus on a shared mission, actually the biggest proportion of clients who've been backing that work has been from Asia. So it really does tell you that there is a natural leaning to come together and learn from experts and keep on kind of pioneering around the edges and to lean into that.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm loving there's so many threads that you're all talking to that really is about what authentic community building from the perspective of Asia that's authentic and historical and forward-looking to Asia really looks like. So thank you so much, Cheryl, and for those incredible examples of the new financing mechanisms as well that the Optimus Foundation has been, so key in piloting. Alim, last but not least, I'm going to come to you. You're a wonderful board member alongside me at Empower, an incredible philanthropist, and you're an author of a monthly blog for the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. Can you share more about what you've learned in your own personal philanthropic journey? What is the same and what is different in Asia?
Thanks, Swati. I think, again, thank you for having me. And it's been really great listening to everyone. I think a lot of the points that you made definitely resonate with me. Um, when I was listening, I felt an intense pressure to stick to 3 points. So I'll try to do something like that, but let's see how it goes. So I think first of all, just in terms of the history of Asian philanthropy, a lot of people have covered it here. I think everyone here probably is aware, but it's just important to reiterate it is different. It's deeply personal. It's very much trust-based. It's family-led. Often it's aligned with business, and it's in the communities that the families who've generated their wealth operate in. So it is quite different from the West in terms of the heritage and what's happened, but it is a very long-standing heritage, and there's a deep desire, as you mentioned, in countries like Indonesia, India, elsewhere, to ensure you give back to the communities. Now, I think what's happened because of that, and the second point is really around the time it's taken to professionalize as it compares to the West. I remember when I came out to Asia 20 years ago, and India was probably just like further along in its journey a little bit more, and you could see with the growth of intermediaries like Dassault Empower or other organizations like that. You could see with the start of the CSR law 10 years or 2013 that really like it was starting to develop the infrastructure much earlier. And I think to Brian's point, I think the rest of Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, has now started to see a lot more funds and flows coming in to the region, a lot more wealth coming into the region. But the social sector infrastructure has just started to develop. So if I look up, there's a recent Bridgespan report. It highlighted that out of the top 20 global funders, only one, actually Hong Kong Jockey Club, is based in Asia. But if you compare that, 40% of the world's billionaires are based in Asia. So that gives you a sense of what the opportunity is in terms of what the development could be in the future. Right. And I think that that's the third point, which is really around the opportunity that exists because of that. I think everyone's already covered it, so I don't want to belabor the point, but we have an opportunity, given where we are at this exact point, and given some of the aid cuts and changes in funding, to really define what does Asian philanthropy look like in the future. And it can be different, right? So I think there's definitely things we need to learn from other places in terms of professionalization, in terms of growth of the infrastructure, but we can also look at different things. And I think you will cover it in later points, things like impact investments, as Cheryl mentioned, or the growth of CSR in the region and why that means a different kind of philanthropy potentially from other regions. So I think this is, as we go through the rest of the questions, I think a great opportunity to kind of really define what could Asian philanthropy look like in a different way in the future.
I love that provocation from you, Alim, as well, and I think it's one that we absolutely have to collectively define in Asia and in other regions of the world that's authentic. Because I think there's a lot that we can learn from the trajectories and the histories of philanthropy, but we absolutely can't forget our own unique histories that everyone's kind of spoken to of philanthropy in our own regions. But also, how are we going to meet the moment that we're in, where, we are in a difficult moment in the world, and we also have tremendous opportunity to help meet that moment in new forms of giving. So I'm going to come to the present after that look at the past. And I'm going to ask each of you, what are the three things that you believe the rest of the world needs to learn about the momentum in the Asian giving space today? So I'm going to come to you first, Natasha, if that's okay. So what are the three things that you believe the rest of the world needs to learn about the momentum?
So, one is I think that we have talked about the fact that we are sort of community linked and sort of place-based. And I think that's a good thing, actually, So I think that's worth learning because this idea of, context, localization, and having that sort of personal accountability is, I think, really important. And I think Asian giving does take that seriously. We also find it, I mean, the linked second point is that, again, I feel like businesses actually do take the idea of doing good business seriously. A lot of old businesses do think of, their entire communities and stakeholder groups as things that they need to take along. And they don't necessarily. So while on one hand, yes, there's a certain lack of professionalization of philanthropy as philanthropy alone, I think there is a tremendous amount of thinking within businesses that continues to exist around what's good, what's sustainable, what's ethical, and a lot of it is quiet actually. So like the loud stuff is not necessarily good, but there are a lot of businesses, old and family businesses especially, that really look at sustainability. It's a little bit in the Asian DNA as well, so I think that is good and it's worth retaining. The last is, I think, again, if there is a downside to this, but there is something to be said about a certain amount of focus on integration with government systems, integration with existing state capacity, trying to look at, how are we not just building parallel systems which are philanthropically funded alone, but, how do we build this state capacity up and deliver to the last mile, which really only government can do in some sense. So I think that interest is something that I think is, at least from my context of having worked a little bit in the US and Singapore, etc., it's a lot deeper in India. This idea that we can't really go ahead without government, which is true. I mean, and for that reason. But I think even in the West, this idea that we don't need to look at state capacity is perhaps something that the West needs to start looking at as well.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I think it also speaks to those statistics at the beginning around where the gaps are coming from. That 3 to 3.5 trillion a year that's going to be needed. 2 trillion of that has to come from domestic financing, and the projections of 500 million needs to come from private resources as well. So it really speaks to like, what does that opportunity and that partnership really look like? Nagma, same question for you.
Yeah, which is what does the West, what can the West learn or understand about Asian giving?
Yes, 3 things.
I
So this
think the
time
first thing
I
is
am
that
asking
Asia
everyone for
is a
3.
huge continent, and large continent with many, many countries and even many more contexts. So there is no monolith called Asian giver. There are many kinds of givers and they come from different perspectives. So one thing is it would be a mistake to put us all in one category of givers. That would be it. Second is that it's not even halfway into its potential yet. The potential is very high. There is a huge amount of value that is instilled into all of us since we are conscious. And so and we cannot be measured by the volumes that are being given out right now. I would rather look at the number of givers than look at the quantity each one is signing off. So it would be a mistake to qualify us or to put us in a quantum of giving kind of metrics now, because there is a history to where we are and where the West is in terms of its giving. So that's the second thing. Third is that I think Asian givers are definitely more clued on into what the current problems of the world are. Not I would again not make it not place a halo there and say because they are more conscious or something like that. It's simply because they also share the realities to some extent with the real living experience in some of these places comes from there. So partnering becomes extremely important. A funder in the US or Canada definitely knows less about what's happening in Indonesia or India. And so local partnerships, even to focus how to give, is a very, very good idea. And if we look at reports to understand what is the intention and the quantum and the value of the giving community in these areas, it would be a mistake. So I think these are the 3 things that I would love to point out.
Thank you so much, Nagma. Great 3 points. Radhika, would love to hear yours.
So my top 3 points would be a focus that we have now on strengthening grassroots organizations and realizing that there is a need to build that ecosystem, and change will actually come from the downward push. I think that is something that I think we are doing well. Collaborative and intergenerational giving. I think that is something that, Asian countries are very proud of. It is in the DNA of the family to give, and it's preparing the next generation to be generous, not just with giving their resources, but time. And I think that is something that is we do uniquely. And maybe the third one would be over the last 4 or 5 years, the focus on lived experiences, amplifying the voices of people who we are supporting, and those are the role models that need to be in center stage, right? Not people like us. We are very removed from their journeys. So if you want to really create systemic change, we need to amplify the voices of people who have walked this path, and who can inspire others to stand for change. So I think those would be the three things we are sort of doing well. Yeah.
I love that. I love the focus on the lived experiences, and the call to remember the intergenerational possibilities, especially as we we have the largest youth population ever on the planet, and most of those people currently are in Asia. I think it's going to shift to the African continent in the next decade, but at the moment, Asia is really the space for where young people are. So thank you, Radhika. Alim, I'll come to you next for your 3 points.
Sure. So I think the first one is around the growth in the collaboration, and the collaboration is across funders and across sectors. And we're starting to see more and more of that emerge. So there's a number of examples: Asia Philanthropy Circle, 10 to 19 in India, the Health for Human Potential community, a lot around climate. So a lot of different things that have started in the last 5 to 10 years, and we're starting to see more of that happening in the region, which I think is a real positive and something that more funders can join in the future. I think the second thing is from, I guess, other regions looking at Asia perspective is the opportunity for scale. And I think really scale can come in a number of different ways. Other panelists have already mentioned, I guess, the collaboration with government, which I think is super important in this region. And actually happens, I think, more in this region than elsewhere. The collaboration between these large collaboratives I mentioned, also partnering with the governments, partnering with local community leaders. And I think that makes a huge difference. And another opportunity, I guess, around scale is around adoption by markets. So as we start to see more of these kind of interventions starting to work, there's also the potential for us to commercialize some of them, to find ways to kind of roll them out at scale in ways that can be self-sustainable longer term. And I think it's because of the large population, the large needs, that we are able to develop these interventions at scale in the region. Final point is similar to what a couple of other people have said. I think it's the growth of community-led organizations and the opportunity to really learn about what's happening in the community and from the people on the ground. And I think here there's a lot that's starting to happen in this space. So we're definitely starting to see more in terms of learning from the voice of people in the community, involving community leaders, but I think one thing that we all need to think about is how do we further develop community-led organizations? There's lots of amazing organizations which are doing great work, but then they're not necessarily able to scale up to the extent that we need them to absorb that capacity in the future. So as funders, how can we help them to capacity build? How can we help them to identify new sources of funding to really scale up? Still too often I see, with some of the collaboratives I mentioned, they're raising large sums of money, but then they're giving it to INGOs who are then passing it on to community organizations. And we need to really, over the next 5 to 10 years, develop that next sector. So I think those would be the 3 points.
I love all of those ones, Alim. The focus on let's invest authentically in where the communities are. It speaks to a little bit of what I think Nagma brought it up earlier. There is not a monolith for Asian philanthropy or Asian philanthropists, nor is there a monolith for the ways that our communities need to and should be responding to their unique context. And I love this provocation of we need to do some more kind of partnerships, both with markets and with states as well, to unlock and leverage different forms of financing to meet the needs of that moment. Thank you, Alim. I'll come to you next, Cheryl, for your 3 points. What should everyone know about Asian philanthropy?
Yeah, very much echoing so much of what's been said, but the momentum is real. It's getting very serious. And I suppose, just coming back to the point that Radhika made around sort of, intergenerational philanthropy, but we do see a very, very real wave of younger and often kind of globally educated Asian philanthropists who are really reshaping some of the norms and the conventions around this sort of exciting sector. So specifically, a couple of things that I've kind of observed here, probably more than some of the other global regions in which I've worked, is that there is much higher likelihood that they're going to be involved in climate action, sustainability, circular economies, and so on. And perhaps that's also a little bit sort of rooted in some of the historical pathways that their family has accumulated wealth, which may, at least in the Southeast Asia region, quite often has come from the extractive industries. So there is this kind of, almost like a little bit of a reckoning coming through in the next gen, where you see a lot more sort of newly created chief sustainability roles within the family business, trying to take the legacy into a much cleaner, greener form of doing business, but very much still using the family business as the core lever for change, given how much of the influence and the networks and the just the power of business to do good. So we're seeing a lot of really pioneering concepts being put forward by next gens who are in these kind of sustainability roles, transition credits, all sorts of stuff that the world has not seen before. So a lot to learn from the innovation around business. How does business become more sustainable as a very important, powerful force for good? But they're also growing into sort of impact investing and blended finance in particular, at least in Singapore and Hong Kong. Sort of, I feel like, and India, of course, is sort of also quite a good mature market for impact investing. I do feel like there is almost more momentum here, and also coming, pots of funding coming from government, which is really trying to incentivize the use of different tools for impact outcomes. So there is a degree of kind of just incentives here that are kind of organized, in the governance structures of countries, which I haven't necessarily seen in Europe or the US. And then I suppose number two, apologies, that's quite a lot of points in one. I suppose the other thing to note is that whilst there is this kind of level of professionalization and more strategic philanthropy emerging, more staff, dedicated staff on philanthropy that kind of wasn't probably there in the last generation. I do think that perhaps one of the areas that needs to be kind of further developed, or certainly one thing that we're doing around capacity building, to Alim's point, is around the mindset of outcomes and impact outcomes, and how do we, really kind of drive some of the thought leadership and the practice for impact measurement and management, which I feel is kind of a self-admitted kind of everywhere pervasive problem that a lot of people are facing. And with this new group of believers in impact investing and blended finance is also coming, a forcing function for that capacity to be developed. So I think that for me is a real opportunity for all of us to be able to kind of learn from various different frameworks that are then kind of tying impact outcomes to different sources of financial capital and what they need, but in a very rigorous and robust way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You've all spoken so far to so many different types of unlocking of different capitals, whether it's the financial instruments and products that are out there and with different actors. But I think also many of you have also spoken about the other forms of capital, the social capital, the cultural capital, the political capital, the body capital that people are putting into this work. Finally, Brian, what are your 3 points? What do you think everyone should know about Asian philanthropy?
Yeah, and everyone's made fantastic points, and I really learned a lot. A few of us have spoken about the diversity points about how Asian philanthropy is really diverse. I'd like to really build on that. I see there's diversity in geography, but also diversity in models of philanthropy. So and a number of have mentioned this too, philanthropy through faith and communities, philanthropy through family and private wealth, philanthropy through corporates, and also state-led philanthropy playing a major role. I think the thing is that each of these models brings more to the table than just money. So corporates bring their corporate expertise, faith-based brings that depth of purpose. Family offices, and what Cheryl was saying in terms of exploring different impact structures and capital structures. Community funding brings cohesion, and state in particular brings scale and national credibility. So I'd say my first point is to look at philanthropy as more than just money, and based on that, look at what each model can distinctively offer in the different local contexts. I think to me, the most exciting thing about all this diversity is that actually there's so much more that Asian philanthropists can learn from each other, because diversity just means a fantastic range of models and case studies to be able to pick up. I mean, just taking corporate philanthropy alone, I mean, in India, and so many great panelists here, how that 2% CSR law, how that shaped the sector, how corporates have responded, how this has led to this tremendous evolution of corporate giving. I think that has lessons for so many other Asian countries thinking of boosting corporate's role in society, boosting corporate social value. On the state side, I think the state-led approaches of mainland China and places like Saudi Arabia, so much in common. Speaking of China, the fantastic tech innovations they have in crowdfunding and community-based giving, fantastic lessons. And definitely on the faith side, Islamic giving such as zakat and waqf, really interesting thinking I'm seeing in Southeast Asia and UAE and Saudi, how they have different focus. Some are more zakat focused, some are more waqf focused, but actually there's a lot that they can learn from in terms of how to mobilize and organize that. So this diversity gives this fantastic range of case studies. And leading to my last point is that, with all of this learning, it's trying to and linking this with what Natasha and Alim are saying about the local and the importance of local and communities is I'm thinking it's about learning globally, but acting locally. And I strongly believe that the majority of impact will actually be domestic. And so while cross-border partnerships and platforms, I think that provide fantastic lessons, fantastic coordination, fantastic support, the success lies, because of this diversity, the success will lie in how effectively they're adapted to that national context. And that can only be done locally, I think. So the big driver's impact is, how do we refine domestic programs? How do we support local innovation, local infrastructure, local capacity, and creating the models that work within each country's unique and very distinctive, economic landscape and social landscape within each of their countries. So, those would be the three ones for me, and just really reflecting on this diversity point.
I love it. Everyone's given such incredible points, and I hope everyone. There's a few comments for those of you that can't see, but a lot of people are saying how rich and golden this content is as well. So, all of these things, I think, if you're not already sold on getting involved and understanding more around Asian philanthropy, I'm sure our panelists have really helped you get to that. So lastly, I'm going to come to all of you around the future and looking ahead to meeting the moment. And you've all spoken to elements of this. But I'll come to you first, Alim. What do you think the future of Asian philanthropy is on a 10-year horizon?
So I guess first one, I really agree with everything people said. I loved what Brian just said about learning globally and then implementing locally. I think that's really the essence of what I was going to say, which is I think that we need to continue to retain this Asian context, but we still need to continue to follow what's working well globally. So in that, my points would be one, do even more on collaboratives. I think that it's really started and we're starting to see traction around that, but we are stronger when we work together. So hopefully that continues. And I think, sub point of that would be continuing to co-collaborate with governments. I think it's different in different countries, as was just mentioned, and there's various levels of trust. But I do think that working closely with the governments, piloting things, philanthropy as risk capital, for what government is looking to implement, I think is critical for enabling scale longer term. Third point, already talked about the importance of local community-based organizations, getting more funding to them. One interesting statistic is only 0.6% of all funding globally goes directly to these local organizations. So much of it is filtered through other amazing organizations, but we need to get it absorbed by these smaller organizations as well. And then finally, just in terms of learning best practices globally, right? Empower does a lot of these things, but so do many other great organizations. Listening to the people on the ground, having youth and the people we're looking to serve be the protagonists, the center of the story, telling us what they really need, and then designing programs around them. Second is the importance of long-term partnerships, giving flexible, unrestricted funding. And then the third is around capacity building. And I think this comes in the form of institutional capacity building, helping with M&E, but also continue to invest in the social sector infrastructure we've talked about all the way through. So this would be the growth of the intermediaries in the sector, talent development of people in the sector. I think this is something that we need to continue to really learn from the West in that perspective.
Excellent points. Thank you so much, Alim. Nagma, I'm going to go to you next. You said that it's taken 10 years to get to the point of really starting and getting moving. So what's next for you and Give? Or in other words, what is the one contribution you would like to make to the giving ecosystem in Asia? Oh, I think Nagma's just going to be rejoining us, hopefully. So, Natasha, I'll come to you as Nagma comes back online. Natasha, what opportunities are there across Asia to more meaningfully engage with philanthropy?
I think there are certain things that we have found. I mean, I can just speak from our experience where we have found successes with collaborations across geographies in Asia. And I maybe want to talk about three tangible examples because they're a bit recent. So, one is on research and technology. So I think that there tends to be this idea also because, again, of the historic domination of a lot of academic institutions in the West. But now we are finding, great collaborators and partners with institutions and academics in Asia. And so our fundamental research on brain sciences is something that's a great example of where we are finding a lot of synergy, both in terms of money as well as knowledge. Same with technology. I think there's a lot of conversation on the digital public infrastructure that's happening in India and actually has use cases in Indonesia and Africa and different parts. So I think a little bit of this exchange, there's a lot of potential. The other piece is social innovation, for instance. We recently just talked about longevity and aging in India, but then what we have found is we have found a lot of incoming sort of requests for conversations from different parts of Asia, because it is a common issue that different societies are looking at. But because it's so cultural, I think our brainstorming and solutioning, there's a lot of potential with other Asian countries who are looking at the same issues. And the last, I think, area where we have again found some degree of alignment over and above just everything that we've spoken about on this panel is on storytelling and communication, because we have done certain collaborative communication products, whether it's for a book for the LGBTQI community in South Asia, so it's Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, so because there is similarity there, or on climate and adaptation because of tropical zones and heat distress and so on and so forth. So we're finding that they can be almost like co-productions and sort of joint funding for communications products that are telling Asian stories with very like high quality sort of storytelling. So those are some tangible things we've done.
I love that. And both of the last two examples that you gave, both around the investment in local academics and research that's very context heavy and context defined and centered, and the storytelling really speaks to, we need to document some of the incredible, expertise and histories that we have around this work and the potential to really do that exchange. And it actually reminded me of, Empower does these incredible learning journeys between grantees, not just in Asia, but between Asia and the African continent, or with Latin America as well. And there's been some fabulous exchanges even between the local organizations in exchanging both within their own regions, but also cross-regionally as well. So I love that one around, we've talked a lot about south to south collaboration, but also the expertise that also needs to go from south to north as well, and not the kind of following the pathways that just come from the north before. Thank you, Natasha. Nagma, hopefully your internet is okay to come back to you with the question for you.
I'm back.
So yes, great. So what's next for you and Edelgive? What's the one contribution you would like to make to the giving system in Asia after 10 years in this work, but only just starting?
Yes. Hello. I hope you can hear and see me very clearly. Okay.
Perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I ended my first question with the answer, with the last line that I had said was that if there's one thing we learned is that if we try to go solo on anything, we'll never get past the starting line. We also had some other insights that, this is probably the only sector in the world, the only industry in the world where processes are personalized instead of made very common, very, very easy. Every other industry in the world has its most complex process, most simplified, and that's where scale happens. Here, we as philanthropies are extremely isolated in how we processize things. What we've also learned is if there is a robust process that we can all trust, then we can all focus on the purpose. So I also see some of the questions in the chat box which are talking about, how do we institutionalize philanthropy? How do domestic philanthropies kind of start wiring in? Why collaboration is difficult? It is difficult because we all coming from personal contexts, personal journeys, and there is no common wireframe of even operation. What we do is we craft collaborations that help us walk the talk, that put action into the intention of how to give better, give smarter, and therefore, how to make money, moving money from funders to the smaller grassroots actually possible, because we all understand that grassroots should receive their resources, but everything gets stuck in the how of it, the logistics and the regulation of how to manage this whole movement of resource. What Edelgive really focuses on is how to simplify this process, how to make giving easy and receiving even easier, how to make reporting understandable, how to remove the nonsensical from the processes and make it very common sense, very intuitive, and very smart. So what we've also identified is this is the space that very few people really work in. While we have a mission and vision statements, to actualize it, we'll have to go back to the boring, go back to the extremely tactical pieces of like how to do something, how to make these two worlds meet. So Edelgive's entire focus is on the meeting of these two worlds with dignity. How do we ensure that with coming resources, the power balance does not get completely destabilized? How do we create collaboratives where the voice of the grantee is a very important stakeholder in how decisions are made? How do we reasonableize processes where giving can happen? So this is where we really are. 2-3 years ago, we launched Grow, which worked with 100 organizations across the country and 37 funders. Now, we are on the verge of a second version of Grow, which is looking at more than 200 organizations, everybody receiving grants, simultaneously from a cluster of funders. This is where we're finding our best spot from where we can have, manage the complexity of the giving world and the receiving world, also the complexity of the international giver and the Asian giver. So looking at systems from a long lens perspective is what we want to do.
I love that. And I love all the questions that you gave us, Nagma, in how do we approach this moment? What are the questions that we really need to hold close and true, like in moving ahead on this? Thank you. I'm going to come to you next, Cheryl. Looking ahead, what are the biggest levers you and the UBS Optimus Foundation are prioritizing to scale impact in Asia?
Thank you so much, Swati. And I think actually the operative word there is scale. We were sort of slightly obsessed by scale, almost kind of.
Cheryl, do you mind just moving your
Better?
microphone a little bit closer? Yeah, much better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying that really the operative word is scale, because the Optimus Foundation sort of over time has become ever so slightly obsessed with scale. And I suppose kind of one of the biggest sort of bets that we're making to get to scale is on blended finance and innovative financing mechanisms. And I suppose sort of it feels a little bit natural as well, because we have sort of an investment bank, we have an asset management arm. You know, there are different pools of capital and different types of investors around with that we have access to, with different sort of risk return profiles for their capital. And if, you know, I suppose our job as Optimus is really to try and kind of inject the impact outcome to be at the heart of that shared mission between different types of providers for the capital stack. So really that's a big bet we've been making, and we have actually sort of successfully closed $100 million blended finance fund, a first of its kind, really focused on, you know, it's 20 million of philanthropy that unlocked and attracted 80 million of commercial capital that otherwise would not have found it compelling or you know, kind of able to come into that structure. And the full 100 million is going into 15 to 20 outcomes contracts that are really focused on driving kind of impact outcomes, quite deep ones in education, health, climate, etc. So really that's where we feel our strength is. But at the same time, if I talk kind of a little bit more locally in Asia, there isn't always the same kind of modality. We felt we needed to build pipeline for these scalable models that then become bankable and investable. And so we've been actually with the LSE, in fact, building more of a base around the 100x Impact Accelerator as a means to be able to build capacity in the sector, make some of these really incredible kind of potential social unicorns more investable, so that we can also take them into our impact investing and blended finance portfolios. So I suppose kind of that's one big bet. And the second core lever is really
Can I ask you to just do it in one quick minute for your last one? I'm just conscious of our timing, Cheryl, but
yes.
please
No problem.
finish.
Yeah, really, it's again, you know, we all talked about the fact that collaboration comes fairly naturally to an Asian philanthropist or impact investor, and I suppose what we're trying to do is also to bring more structure and rigor and measurement around collaborative models. So we have created collectives, which I suppose are really quite sort of structured approaches towards a shared mission, and that, you know, that I suppose is trying to sort of bring some level of professionalization into the sector, so that they are more than just a grouping of sort of minds and like-minded individuals, but actually really pretty laser focused on the impact outcomes being achieved. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I'm sorry to cut off people. I'm going to ask you all to like trim your final ones, just so that we can answer one or two of the questions in the chat. Radhika, if we were to arrange a meeting of female philanthropists in 3 years, what are the successes that this group of women would share?
I think success looks different for different people. I think for me, it would be that giving is become an aspirational, especially for young women. It is something that they want to do. It comes from deep purpose and something that's not forced. Second would be also that there's an amazing ecosystem that has emerged, and people want to take up working in this development sector as a career, right? And that this is a great space to work in, and investing in leadership of people who are working in the development sector is a very important aspect that we didn't even speak about, and the focus needs to be on that as well. And the third, on a more personal and more emotional and a more humane thing, would be that giving has truly changed these women. And I think when you change as a person, you come up with better solutions for people. So yeah, more on the emotional, and yeah, that the giving has been an amazing journey for them, and it's brought them joy.
I love that, Radhika. It reminds me of the book, The Joy of Giving. And actually, I think when there's like someone who's leading research on like when you give at any scale of giving, you're actually, how does that joy of giving actually increase your own like happiness in life, but also your like longevity of living as well. And I think that it really speaks to that whole, if we want this to be sustainable and durable, it has to be something that feels deeply personal and that we're going to be committed to as well. Finally, Brian, I'm going to come to you. If we were having this conversation 5 years from now, what would be the same and what would be different?
Thanks, Hadi. What I hope will stay the same is that the Asia's philanthropic ecosystem remains dynamic. I think, as Cheryl was mentioning, it's got so much momentum. Love for that momentum to continue and get stronger, and we've got more collaboration, but also more locally led solutions. What I hope will evolve will be both the sector itself and how it works with other sectors. So, within philanthropy, I'd love to see a more connected, a more confident philanthropic community here in Asia, where funders, we learn from each other, we adapt successful practices from similar contexts, we give more strategically, and that's not just more giving, but also smarter giving, and that's very suited and tailored to the local context. Second, how the philanthropy works with other sectors. I think we all recognize that philanthropy is a drop in the ocean compared to public sector capital and private sector capital. And so many of us here have mentioned government and great structures like blended finance. And so next 5 years, I really hope we found better ways for leverage. We would have found more working a wider range of financial structures that bring in, crowd in other sources of capital. We've got better partnerships to activate both private sector and public sector capital in a way that is co-designed from the start and therefore more integrated and therefore more scalable. And lastly, I'd say we measure ourselves by our outcomes. So 5 years, I hope to have healthier communities, stronger education, safer environments, and really greater opportunity for all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian, and to reflect together and see how many of these predictions have come true from you and from others. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I've just been looking through the incredible questions that's come from the attendees. Thank you so much. Some of them came early in the discussion, just around how, philanthropy needs to not be institutionalized or the professionalization and the question around nonprofit scaling, which I think actually a number of the panelists have already spoken to in terms of the need for deeper investment, the working with local communities, the making sure things are context specific as well. So I hope, Mayudhar, some of those questions have been answered already. Nivedita, you had asked just around how long will it take, or what will it take for capital to become more risk tolerant, long term, and aligned with government priorities? And I think that a lot of the panelists have also spoken around how that the risk tolerance is evolving. It's obviously there isn't a monolith. There are some that are taking those risks and are moving forward, and others that are not. But I think most of the panelists have talked to the need to collaborate and work with domestic level financing and to work much more on how to unlock those different forms of capital. And Cheryl also particularly talked about some of the financial mechanisms and mechanics that UBS Optimus are doing around that. So I hope some of those answers have come across. There was a question also from Priscilla, how do we move beyond talking to really getting funding and the work done together? And I think a number of you spoke to the need for community, that there is this evolution that's happening, but to go faster, to go longer, and to go more sustainably and durable together, we need to come together much more. That community gives a different sense of bravery and an unlocking within that. Cheryl, there was a particular question for you on can we share more about which governments are offering pots of funding to incentivize more impact, which I'm sure you probably have some views on, but we might not have time for it today, but just to name that, and hopefully we can follow up with some of the resources that UBS Optimus has or insights that they have. And then there were really questions around the diverse and interconnected sort of how can philanthropy address large-scale national challenges and specific to local communities. And I think Brian at the start really talked about how a lot of Asian philanthropy and the work that Institute of Philanthropy is doing has that kind of staged approach in how we need to respond to the moment. We need to build for the future, and we need to build the infrastructure around that allows that sustainability and durability to explore around it. And then there was some questions just around some critical areas about the infrastructure that actually enables Asian philanthropists to give more and give faster. But I think everyone spoke to what that's going to take. It's going to take community. It's going to take different levels of financing. It's going to take a need for community and convening together. And I think also to some of the points that also Natasha made, we also need to document some of this. Like all of this is available and rich, and we need to kind of look at that and build our own histories and expertise around. So I hope, we haven't had time to maybe delve into the questions as deeper as we should, but I actually feel that the panelists have spoken to all of the components and elements around that as well. And we really do need, all the different types of financing, but particularly every panelist spoke to the need for how communities need to be at the center of all of this giving as well. And they need to shape solutions with this. So I know we're 2 minutes over time, so thank you for those that have been able to stay on for those extra few minutes. Please join me in thanking all of these incredible panelists for all the expertise and the wisdom that they've shared with us all today. And also please join me in thanking Amelia from the Marshall Institute and from Nisha and Dhanvi from Empower for all of the incredible work behind the scenes. Please come on camera, just show your faces to the people if you can. As we all know, there is a tremendous amount of work that happens behind the scenes to make events like this happen. So really, thank you to these three superstars. We hope you will join us again for more conversations in the future and these 3 to 5 year look backs. So thank you, everyone.